I kind of relate to Dr. Bob quite a bit for whatever reason. I think for one thing I do relate is his sarcasm. A bit of a sarcasm when he describes himself and his illness and his struggles. So Dr. Bob was a physician, and he was the second person who recovered from alcoholism in June of 1939 when Bill Wilson came from New York to Akron to do a business deal, and the deal went south. So he made a bunch of phone calls and he was guided to Dr. Bob. And Dr. Bob was already attending Oxford Group. Oxford Group was the place where our program came from. There's a great book called Writing the Big Book, really big, thick book. It's also on audio. It's very interesting as far as history. And so Dr. Bob they were kind of like the Oxford Group were praying for Dr. Bob's recovery because he admitted to them that he was alcoholic. And one of the members of the Oxford Group, Henrietta Seiberling, she heard, like in meditation, she heard that a person is coming for Dr. Bob. And so when this person, Bill, called her a couple months later, a month later, she was like, "Oh, we've been expecting you." And he thought that they were expecting him because somebody told her, like a person told her that he's been calling alcoholics, but she was expecting him because she heard it in meditation. Like God told her that somebody's coming to help Dr. Bob. And so he resisted doing the amends, making amends. Of course, he was a physician. He didn't want to make amends to his patients, telling them that he operated on them while drunk. But eventually he had to because he relapsed. And so June 10th, 1935 is considered the birth date of AA. That's when Dr. Bob went around and made his amends and never drank again. He lived for 15 years since then. During those 15 years, he helped 5,000 alcoholics. Neither Bill nor Dr. Bob ever really held a job after they founded AA, so Dr. Bob was basically kind of surviving on until AA started selling the book, and until they got money, he was just surviving on donations or loans from like Rockefeller, including Rockefeller, and also I think Charlie Towns, the owner of the Towns Hospital, loaned the money. But so these people, they had no money, and yet he still was working like crazy, helping alcoholics, helping them as a doctor, helping them as a recovered alcoholic, never taking any money from them. So it's really quite amazing, like how altruistic truly this movement was, and how Dr. Bob and Bill together, working in Akron that year, from June. I think Bill stayed there for 3 months. And so they worked and they kind of hashed out this program, like what do we do with alcoholics? How do we get them recovered? Because Oxford Group only had 6 steps, and then they figured out the algorithm. So let's read on page 171. I was born in a small New England village of about 7,000 souls. The general moral standard was, as I recall it, far above the average. No beer or liquor was sold in the neighborhood except at the state liquor agency, where perhaps one might procure a pint if he could convince the agent that he really needed it. Without this proof, the expectant purchaser would be forced to depart empty-handed, with none of what I later came to believe was the great panacea for all human ills. Men who had liquor shipped in from Boston or New York by express were looked upon with great distrust and disfavor by most of the good townspeople. The town was well supplied with churches and schools in which I pursued my early educational activities. So he was born in a small place with high morals. Alcohol was not really a normal thing. People were frowned upon those who drank a lot, and yet it didn't stop him from being an alcoholic. And also, he mentions here a feature of an alcoholic, like why does an alcoholic become an alcoholic? Is because when they drank, he came to believe was the great panacea for all human ills. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. So alcoholics love alcohol. That's what makes them alcoholics. Because it's like the world becomes like different, a better place. Like alcohol is your best friend. So with us compulsive eaters, I also discovered food or compulsive eating, overeating. Really, we're not. Our addiction is not to food; it's to compulsive eating. It's like to uh, a behavior, like it's not the behavior; it's the way we eat. So the way I ate, like if I ate for very early on, I discovered that eating can solve my emotional problems. And my childhood wasn't particularly positive. I mean, we had alcoholism in our family, but my drug was eating. I discovered eating early on, and eating was like my favorite thing to do. My mom couldn't hide the food well enough. I would like look around the house and find that food. And so for us, compulsive eating is that miracle, is that thing that makes the world a wonderful place, that gives you ease and comfort, gives you like, ah. And that's why we compulsively eat, because we like it. My father was a professional man of recognized ability, and both my father and mother were most active in church affairs. Both father and mother were considerably above the average in intelligence. Unfortunately for me, I was the only child, which perhaps engendered the selfishness which played such an important part in bringing on my alcoholism. From childhood through high school, I was more or less forced to go to church, Sunday school, and evening service, Monday night Christian endeavor, and sometimes to Wednesday evening prayer meeting. This had the effect of making me resolve that when I was free from parental domination, I would never again darken the doors of a church. This resolution I kept steadfastly for the next 40 years, except when circumstances made it seem unwise to absent myself. So here's the really horrible, difficult childhood of Dr. Bob. He was made to go to church. Oh my God. It was Sunday school, evening service, Monday night, and sometimes even Wednesday evening. Right. So it's like he writes about like the selfishness, right? He was the only child, so he thought that maybe this contributed this selfishness. I was not the only child. I was the first child, but I was definitely extremely selfish. I literally considered myself the head of our household because my mom kind of asked me to manage my dad, and I was just like, I am the main person here. And I find again and again, every person I sponsor, I ask them, did you ever consider yourself like you are the in charge of everything? And they're like, yeah, come to think of it, yes, I am in charge of things at home, in charge of things at work. That's part of our illness is we think we are above everybody. And here also, father and mother were considerably above the average in intelligence. I can also relate to that because at least, for us in our family, we were kind of like probably higher IQ than normal. So, but I use that. We use it. We are intelligent people. And so we use the intelligence to again be selfish and to be better than everybody. Okay. So this was my main like tool at school where I would just go and I just feel better because school was super easy and boring for me. And it was just very easy for me to do. And everybody would just be like trying to figure this out. And I'd be like, okay, whatever. I'd be like doing my own things during school, and it helped me feel superior and helped me feel lonely. So, like, loneliness is one more dimension of our illness. The more you progress in your illness, the more lonely you get. Bill, in his story, wrote that you will know the depths of loneliness that few people know. And that's one of the reasons is because when you are driven by ego, which is our problem, right? When you're even driven by yourself, selfishness, you constantly on a daily basis, in many, many ways, try to separate by comparing. I am better, they're worse. I am worse, they're better. I am fat, they're thin. I am thin, they're fat. Whatever. I am like, I have more money, or I'm whatever. The more you compare, the more you separate yourself. And that you become lonelier and lonelier and lonelier. Like in my marriage, I was married for 12 years, but I felt more lonely by the end of that marriage than when I started. because it's just like constant division, resentment, hurt, more resentment. You kind of like compile a list of resentments towards your spouse, and you become complete strangers. So it's really horrible. But also this ingratitude towards parents. That was my feature as well. I was just like, these people, why did they give birth to me? I think that's a hallmark of a spiritually sick person, is being resentful for being born. I discarded everything they did for me and only remembered things that they didn't do right or didn't do the way I wanted them to do. My sponsor once told me that your relationship with your parents is the main relationship, or the core relationship that you're gonna have to heal that should, if you really like recovered. So that's like the ideal, not the ideal, but it's always should be like an aspiration and a desire to heal that relationship as much as you can. So it took me quite a while to do that. Page 172. Let's go back to Dr. Bob. After high school came After high school came 4 years in one of the best colleges in the country, where drinking seemed to be a major extracurricular activity. Almost everyone seemed to do it. I did it more and more and had lots of fun without much grief, either physical or financial. I seemed to be able to snap back the next morning better than most of my fellow drinkers, who were cursed or perhaps blessed with a great deal of morning after nausea. Never once in my life have I had a headache, which fact leads me to believe that I was an alcoholic almost from the start. My whole life seemed to be centered around doing what I wanted to do without regard for the rights, wishes, or privileges of anyone else, a state of mind which became more and more predominant as the years passed. I was graduated summa cum laude in the eyes of the drinking fraternity, but not in the eyes of the dean. All right, so he was able to eat a lot. I think I was able to eat a lot as well, and I wasn't like a bulimic, so some of us are able to, I guess, consume large amounts of food. When people, like later already in illness, when my nutritionist friend, she was helping me lose weight. So she basically asked me, like, well, can you send me the list of everything you ate in the last 3 days? And that thought really horrified me, because I'm like, no, I'm not gonna do that, because I'm afraid to even look at that. I ate so much as a child also. I remembered, like, during holidays, people would just eat a little bit and leave the table, and I could never ever do that. I would just stay at the table and eat for a few more hours. Still don't know how my body was able to digest all that food. I did have an enlarged liver at some point, later. So I guess my body really suffered. But anyway, and here's another like key phrase. My whole life seemed to be centered around doing what I wanted to do, without regard for the rights, wishes, or privileges of anyone else. That is what we think is freedom is. Freedom is doing whatever the heck I want. And so we do whatever we want. I eat whatever I want. I step on, other people, to get promoted in work or whatever. I completely despise a lot of a lot of people around me. Everybody's an idiot. It's the restless, irritable, and discontented state that we say. That's part of our illness: restless, irritable, and discontent. And that's the irritable part. The irritable part is, I translate it for myself as, everybody's an idiot around me. And I never ever even considered, like, until when I came to program, it was a surprise for me. It was actually surprising that when I sit down in the morning and I meditate and I ask how I can be helpful to people, who I can be helpful to, and I'm drawing a complete blank. Like, I have no idea what people even need, how I can be useful. I had no idea. So it was truly a life of extreme selfishness. And kind of looking back right now, it's like the longer you're in recovery, the more you see how sick you were to begin with. So I'm now like 9 years in program, and looking back, I'm like, now I even wonder how I stayed alive at all, because I know, like, selfishness is really detrimental to everything. Like, I almost died, right, from selfishness, but I was somehow managed for 43 years, to be this extremely self-absorbed person who viewed everybody as basically like it's kind of like a puppet theater, and everybody's like a puppet, and I'm the only one, like I'm the one running the show. So next one is on page 173. My next move was to take up the study of medicine, entering one of the largest universities in the country. There I took up the business of drinking with much greater earnestness than I had previously shown. On account of my enormous capacity for beer, I was elected to membership in one of the drinking societies and soon became one of the leading spirits. Many mornings I have gone to classes, and even though fully prepared, would turn and walk back to the fraternity house because of my jitters, not daring to enter the classroom for fear of making a scene should I be called in on for recitation. Another thing I think is kind of a hallmark of addicts is we take up different things, like, oh, I'm going to do this and I'm going to study that and I'm going to change my profession, but it always has to be the best, right? So one of the largest universities, I remember when I was choosing school, my mom and I were kind of like, well, which school to choose? Well, of course, the one that is the most prestigious, that will make me the most money, etc. So it wasn't really, I was never really considering what I liked, or I didn't even know what I liked. I just knew I had to be the best. Sometimes I call this illness, it's kind of like the illness of being the star. You always have to be the star, either in society or in your own eyes, or somehow in some other ways, like you always have to be the best. And that's why we're obsessed with our bodies, is because, like, I want to be the best looking, the thinnest person, whatever. Why? So I have the power and the prestige. It's kind of like overcompensation. As I see it, it's because inside I felt like I was really ugly, I was fat, I was horrible, and so I had to be like use my intellect and etc. to be better than everybody. So then there's a few paragraphs of how Dr. Bob was in school, and even some of his classmates had to send for his father to help with his drinking. Compulsive eating is not as visible as drinking. Like people don't see you drunk when you overeat, but it's still, yeah, of course it causes a lot of trouble. One of the things that it does is it steals a lot of time from your life and from you being useful. So like you try to, like I would often remember I would sit at work and I would just think about what are they baking today at Starbucks, for example, or what am I gonna eat for dinner? So much time spent thinking about other things or about other people, or how other people are bad, or how my boss is stupid, or how I'm doing more than everybody, everybody's an idiot as usual, same train of thought, and you just spend a lot of time on this kind of stuff, and you're not productive. I find that part of our illness is this kind of laziness, the inability or unwillingness to be generous with your time and with your effort. And I still struggle with that. Like I notice how I'm just like I just don't want to be to be giving my time to other people. So that's why the 12-step program is so brilliant, is because it forces us to help others. It forces us, like this marathon, 24 hours, we're devoting our time to it, and it helps discipline us, in a way like God disciplines us, as they say, at the end of forget which chapter, I think Into Action. We're very undisciplined and we allow God to discipline us this way. Then there was his period. So he became a doctor, and then he describes it, like the chapter is called Dr. Bob's Nightmare. And here's, a couple of paragraphs about what that nightmare looked like. During the next few years, I developed two distinct phobias. One was the fear of not sleeping, and the other was the fear of running out of liquor. Not being a man of means, I knew that if I did not stay sober enough to earn money, I would run out of liquor. Most of the time, therefore, I did not take the morning drink which I craved so badly, but instead would fill up on large doses of sedatives to quiet the jitters, which distressed me terribly. So that's to the point that we actually spent a lot of money on food. I remember I was working, I had this one period of workaholism. I worked literally 16 hours a day and just worked and slept, which was fun. I enjoyed it. But I think I visited, we had like this little corner supermarket on my way from my office to my home. And I visited that supermarket like literally 3 times a day. And I also had this like, not obsession, but desire. I didn't want to binge on cheap foods. I wanted like, because I'm so special, I need to buy the fanciest foods. I think I spent like all my money on food. It is a real problem. So occasionally I would yield to the morning craving, but if I did, it would be only a few hours before I would be quite unfit for work. This would lessen my chances of smuggling some home that evening, which in turn would mean a night of futile tossing around in bed followed by a morning of unbearable jitters. During the subsequent 15 years, I had sense enough never to go to the hospital if I had been drinking, and very seldom did I receive patients. I would sometimes hide out in one of the clubs of which I was a member, and had the habit at times of registering at a hotel under a fictitious name. But my friends usually found me, and I would go home if they promised that I should not be scolded. If my wife was planning to go out in the afternoon, I would get a large supply of liquor and smuggle it home and hide it in a coal bin with a clothes chute over door jambs, over beams in the cellar, and in cracks in the cellar tile. I also made use of old trunks and chests, the old can container, and even the ash container. The water tank on the toilet I never used because it looked too easy. I found out later that my wife inspected it frequently. I used to put 8 or 12-ounce bottles of alcohol in a fur-lined glove and toss it onto the back airing porch when winter days got dark enough. My bootlegger had hidden alcohol at the back steps where I could get it at my convenience. Sometimes I would bring it in my pockets, but they were inspected, and then that became too risky. I used also to put it up in 4-ounce bottles and stick several in my stocking tops. This worked nicely until my wife and I went to see Wallace Beery in Tugboat Annie, after which the pant leg and stocking racket were out. I will not take space to relate all of my hospital or sanitarium experiences. So during all this time, we became more or less ostracized by our friends. We could not be invited out because I would surely get tight, and my wife dared not invite people in for the same reason. My phobia for sleeplessness demanded that I get drunk every night, but in order to get more liquor for the next night, I had to stay sober during the day at least up to 4 o'clock. This routine went on with few interruptions for 17 years. It was really a horrible nightmare. This earning money, getting liquor, smuggling it home, getting drunk, morning jitters, taking large doses of sedatives to make it possible for me to earn more money, and so on ad nauseam. I used to promise my wife, my friends, and my children that I would drink no more, promises which seldom kept me sober even through the day, though I was very sincere when I made them. So 17 years, reading this, and his wife like stuck with him, and she was trying to help him, find his liquor, pour out his liquor, and our relatives, our family goes through this with us. My poor ex-husband, I made him go through a lot with me, and he would often try to help me. Sometimes he would, like, once he asked me, like, what if instead of eating, you go take a jog, or go for a little run? I'm like, I looked at him like he had two heads, and I literally, my response was like, I just want to punch you in the face, not go for a run, like nobody takes my food away from me. So this lasted 17 years for Dr. Bob, and also from what I can calculate, my struggle and my war on my body and my food and my eating, my attempts to fix this, my attempts to lose weight and try all the different things, they lasted at least 27 years, maybe 29 years. Just from teenage years until I came to program, when I finally realized that this stuff doesn't work. Like, I tried so many different things, as I'm sure we all have, right? We've tried all possible ways of eating, from veganism to paleo to keto to whatever, right? To Ayurvedic, to, like, if it exists, we've probably tried it, right? Then I caught on to therapy, spirituality. I started reading books about, why am I so unhappy? Why am I so miserable? What do I not know in this world? Please, somebody tell me. What am I missing here? Why am I so, like, I was constantly searching, constantly trying. I thought I could figure it out. Like, ooh, next book. I think if I look at I think once I counted or calculated on Amazon how many books I bought. I think it's like 200 self-help books, all kinds of knowledge, all kinds of information. None of it helped. Like, it just doesn't help with when you're selfish, and you try to figure things out on your own. It just doesn't work. The next one is kind of also funny. Talking about sarcasm. For the benefit of those experimentally inclined, I should mention the so-called beer experiment. When beer first came back, I thought that I was safe. I could drink all I wanted of that. So that's how I thought. Oh, paleo diet. I can eat however, like, whatever I want and still lose weight. Um, it was harmless. Nobody ever got drunk on beer, so I filled the cellar full. But yeah, nobody ever, gained weight on protein and greens. It's like, well, hold my beer, right? Hold my beer. I mean, once my last quote unquote diet was almost like keto. I mean, just vegetables and proteins. Okay, that was my last quote unquote diet, and I did lose weight, but I almost killed myself during that time. It was just really horrible. And so Dr. Bob describes how, like, he decides that, oh, drinking beer is not going to have consequences. So okay, let's do that. And of course, I put on 30 pounds of weight in about 2 months, looked like a pig, and was uncomfortable from shortness of breath. It then occurred to me that after one was all smelled up with beer, nobody could tell what had been drunk. So I began to fortify my beer with straight alcohol. Of course, the result was very bad, and that ended the beer experiment. Chapter 3 describes it really well, how our mind will lead us to the next binge. No matter how hard you try, it will trick us one way or another. It will cajole us into the next binge. I had a lot of experiments that ended badly because you always just come back to compulsive eating. Like, no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, you're still going to be compulsively eating someday, one way or another. It always gets worse, never better. That's why our illness is chronic, progressive, and therefore deadly. And the 12-step program is the only thing that can not stop it, but arrest it 24 hours at a time. It's daily reprieve, as we say. But if we stop doing the program, we will go back to compulsively eating as if we never were recovered. So now Dr. Bob is going to talk about the Oxford group. So he found the Oxford group. His wife, Anne, was a very spiritual person. And by another miraculous chain of events, through the Oxford group getting Harvey Firestone, there was this Firestone heir who was an alcoholic, and Oxford group got him sober. And so his father, the Firestone guy, brought Oxford Group into Akron. That's how Oxford Group appeared there. And when Bill came there, he was also sober by the teachings of the Oxford Group. So here's what Dr. Bob says. About the time of the beer experiment, I was thrown in with a crowd of people who attracted me because of their seeming poise, health, and happiness. They spoke with great freedom from embarrassment, which I could never do. And they seemed very much at ease on all occasions and appeared very healthy. More than these attributes, they seemed to be happy. I was self-conscious and ill at ease most of the time. My health was at the breaking point and I was thoroughly miserable. I sensed they had something I did not have, from which I might readily profit. I learned that it was something of a spiritual nature, which did not appeal to me very much, but I thought it could do no harm. I gave the matter much time and study for the next 2.5 years, but I still got tight every night, nevertheless. I read everything I could find and talked to everyone who I thought knew anything about it. My favorite moment is I talked to everyone who I thought knew anything about it. Because with chronic addictions like ours, you can talk to a lot of people about a lot of things, about a lot of your problems, but they will not be able to help you until you find a recovered chronic compulsive eater. I spent by my calculations, I spent probably close to $100,000 on different self-improvement. I don't have children. My life was devoted solely to myself. So all of my, corporate salary, I spent on different workshops, like really expensive ones. And I thought the more money I can throw at it, the more I can buy that happiness that I've been seeking. But like I was going to these workshops for women, I became friends with women. I started trusting women. Everybody just seemed to be having such a great time, and I was like sort of having a good time. But right after the workshops, like after the day was over, other women would, go, I don't know, hang out, talk to each other. Me, I just go like directly into a candy store, buy like half a pound of candy or a pound, and start circling around the streets of Manhattan, eating the gummy bears or whatever it was. Like one time, like those guys who give out like flyers in New York, they're like all happy. One of them gave me a flyer and asked me like, "Why do you look so miserable? Why do you look so upset?" It's like I literally again wanted to punch him in the face. I'm like, I hate everybody. I can pretend to be like, I guess I'm happy. I guess I'm like, ooh, we're dancing together, a bunch of women. Hell, but and then I'm like, loneliness and despair. It never leaves you. So, and when I asked this woman who was leading the workshops, I had like this little one-on-one with her conversation. She looked at me and she's like, "Why do you look like somebody died in your family? Like why do you look so like?" She really didn't know. I mean, even though her methods might have helped other women, they didn't work for me. And even spiritual stuff, I studied yoga, I studied a bunch of different things. I wasn't religious, but I studied different spirituality paths. Again, no. On page 179. About this time, a lady called up my wife one Saturday. That was the Henrietta Seiberling. A lady called up my wife one Saturday afternoon saying she wanted me to come over that evening to meet a friend of hers who might help me. It was the day before Mother's Day, and I had come home plastered carrying a big potted plant, which I set down on the table and forthwith went upstairs and passed out. The next day she called again. Wishing to be polite, though I felt very badly, I said, "Let's make the call," and extracted from my wife a promise that we would not stay over 15 minutes. So he felt guilty, right? And this guilt helped secure his attention for 15 minutes with Bill. Sometimes, as we say, God uses our character defects to our advantage. So she was able to manipulate him into talking to Bill. We entered her house at exactly 5 o'clock, and it was 11:15 when I left. I had a couple of shorter talks with this man afterward and stopped drinking abruptly. This was Bill. This was their conversation. So it lasted 6.5 hours, I guess. That was quite a conversation. So Bill was able to get his attention. This dry spell lasted for about 3 weeks, but he didn't want to make amends, right? He didn't want to go and tell people, that he was wrong. Then I went to Atlantic City to attend several days meeting of a national society of which I was a member. I drank all the scotch they had on the train and bought several quarts on my way to the hotel. This was on Sunday. I got tight that night, stayed sober Monday till after the dinner, and then proceeded to get tight again. I drank all I dared in the bar and then went to my room to finish the job. Tuesday, I started in the morning. He got drunk because he didn't want to make amends. And then somebody, shipped him back, put him on a train home. Bill and Anne picked him up. That was June 10, 1935. The question which might naturally come into your mind would be, what did the man do or say that was different from what others had done or said? It must be remembered that I had read a great deal and talked to everyone who knew or thought they knew anything about the subject of alcoholism. As I mentioned, right? A lot of people think they know about compulsive eating, but only a person who has gone through this hell and recovered can actually tell you how to recover. But this was a man who had experienced many years of frightful drinking, who had most all the drunkard's experiences known to man, but who had been cured by the very means I had been trying to employ, that is to say, the spiritual approach. He gave me the information about the subject of alcoholism, which was undoubtedly helpful. Of far more importance was the fact that he was the first living human with whom I had ever talked who knew what he was talking about in regard to alcoholism from actual experience. In other words, he talked my language. He knew all the answers, and certainly not because he had picked them up in his reading. I heard this speech by a Russian priest who worked with Alcoholics Anonymous, who worked with alcoholics, and who actually understands our program. And it was really interesting. He had to go through a period of where he tried to change the program. He thought that he knew better, and alcoholics started dying. So he's like, okay, no, let's just let these people stick to the original program of AA, the steps and the traditions, and I'll just stay out of the way, and I'll help them as much as I can. So this was like a really, really inspiring story. He understood that AA, and just like our fellowship, we need to function on our own. We don't want to mix anything up with this program. That's why in CCA we don't use any meal plans, we don't use anything additional. We stick to the book because it's our lifeline. And so he said, this priest said, these people as addicts, we're like in this solitary confinement cell, right? And we don't know how to get out, and nobody can help us. Like, people can look in, it's like, hi, maybe you can do this, or maybe you can do that, maybe you should do that. Like, no, it doesn't do anything until you meet a person who has been in that same cell, who has been in that solitary confinement, and he got out and he knows how to get out. It is page 180. It is a most wonderful blessing to be relieved of the terrible curse with which I was afflicted. My health is good, and I have regained my self-respect and the respect of my colleagues. My home life is ideal, and my business is as good as it can be expected in these uncertain times. I spend a great deal of time passing on what I learned to others who want and need it badly. I do it for 4 reasons. 1, sense of duty. 2, it is a pleasure. 3, because in doing so, I'm paying my debt to the man who took time to pass it on to me. And 4, because every time I do it, I take out a little more insurance for myself against a possible slip. So yeah, it's really amazing. Lately, I feel really excited. We started our own fellowship. We used to be a part of another fellowship before, but we carry the message straight out of the big book. And eventually we separated so we can just dedicate ourselves to just carrying the message out of the big book and not muddied up with other things. And I just lately feel very excited. It is a pleasure to sponsor people. It is a pleasure to watch people recover, to watch somebody's life being saved from this horrible illness, to together study our ego and help them figure out what's separating them from their higher power, from God. So it's really great. Dr. Bob also says that his craving for liquor didn't quite disappear. For 2.5 years, he still wanted to drink. It's like there's no whining, in this program. You just, like, if you feel bad, if you feel despair, loneliness, or depression, just go help somebody else. Just go find that next compulsive eater, and that's how we recover and stay recovered. For some people, compulsive eating goes away very quickly. For me, it took like a month and a half, I think. It's just still very quickly, right? But for a month and a half, I was still like kind of overeating. It only stopped when I started sponsoring. I'm a very stubborn person, and it took me a good deal of discipline to actually stop compulsively eating. But then, since then, I don't compulsively eat, for years and years. So the last 2 paragraphs on page 181. If you think you are an atheist, an agnostic, a skeptic, or have any other form of intellectual pride which keeps you from accepting what's in this book, I feel sorry for you. If you still think you're strong enough to beat the game alone, that is your affair. But if you really and truly want to quit compulsively eating for good and all, and sincerely feel that you must have some help, we know that we have an answer for you. It never fails if you go about it with one half the zeal you have been in the habit of showing when you were getting another drink or food for your next binge. Your Heavenly Father will never let you down.